All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating topic lined up for today's deep dive.
Yeah, it's one that I've been following really closely. It's got so many different angles to it. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean TSMC, Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company, putting $100 billion into the U.S. is a big deal.
Yeah, it's not just a company building a new factory or something. I mean, this touches on national security, global supply chains, where economic power is shifting, geopolitics. I mean, it's a huge story.
It really is. And for anyone out there who's, wants to really get a grasp on what's driving, the world today and in the future, I think this is a really, really key event.
Absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we've got an analysis that we're going to be working with. It goes really deep into the arguments for and against this investment.
Hmm.
And importantly, it considers things from both the U.S. side and the Taiwan side.
Yeah, we really want to get both sides of the story here.
Right, exactly.
It's so easy to just hear the U.S. side of it, but there's a whole other side to this story.
Absolutely.
So the really big question we want to get at is, does this represent a big strategic win for the U.S., or is this a big gamble?
Right.
And could it have some really bad consequences for Taiwan and, for everyone, really?
Right. And we are talking about, a really significant amount of money here, $100 billion. That's not chump change.
No, not at all. That's a serious investment.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start by looking at the arguments for why this investment is being seen as a good thing.
Okay, sound good.
I think the first one, and maybe the biggest one, is all about national security. And I don't think you can overstate how important semiconductors are to like every part of modern life, can you?
No, I mean, they're really the foundation of, well, everything. Our phones, computers, cars, even refrigerators. But, beyond those everyday things, they're also vital for national security. Like in defense systems, AI, critical infrastructure, it's all built on semiconductors.
Right, right. And what the analysis really stresses is how risky it is to rely on manufacturing that's mostly happening overseas.
Yeah, especially when you look at the tensions between the U.S. and China.
Exactly, exactly. It just creates this, vulnerability.
A big one. Something happened, and suddenly we couldn't get the chips we need. Well, everything could grind to a halt. And that's not just, annoying. It could be a matter of national security. Like, imagine if a missile system needed a specific chip and we couldn't get it. Or if our communications networks went down because of a chip shortage. It'd be chaos.
It really would.
And, even Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said this is it's about keeping the economy strong, but it's also about protecting the country.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, beyond the military and infrastructure stuff, even the pandemic showed us, how fragile things are when we rely on these long, complex supply chains.
Oh, absolutely. That was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Suddenly you couldn't get a new car because they couldn't get the chips they needed. It was a mess.
Yeah, it was a
So,
mess. So that brings us to this idea of reducing those supply chain vulnerabilities.
right. And that's a big part of what TSMC is trying to do with these new facilities in the U.S.
And it's not just like a little factory or two, is it? This is pretty big, right?
It's huge. They're talking about 6 fabrication plants, which is where they actually make the chips,
Wow.
and then 2 more facilities for advanced packaging, and an R&D center too. So it's not just about making the chips, it's about developing new ones too.
Oh, I see. So they're really putting down roots, huh?
Yeah, they're going all in. And the whole point is to build up that supply chain here so it's less vulnerable to all the uncertainties you see in Asia. And it's not just the government that wants this either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, companies like Apple, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom, they're all behind this. It makes sense for them too. They need these chips and they want a reliable source.
Yeah, I get it. A steady supply is a good thing. Now, let's talk about the economic side of things. The boost to the U.S. economy, the new jobs being created. That's going to be a big part of this, too.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of high-skilled jobs.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Huge. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot of families who are going to benefit from this.
Yeah, it's a real win for the economy. And, even Trump, when he was president, he was talking about how this could help the U.S. get a much bigger share of the global chip market.
Really?
Yeah, he even threw out a number, like 40%. Pretty ambitious.
Wow, that's a lot. But I guess the analysis does say that some experts think that's a bit optimistic, right?
Yeah, I mean, it takes time to build up that kind of capacity.
Yeah.
And you need the skilled workforce, too. It's not something that happens overnight.
Right. It's a long game. But even beyond that specific number, I mean, the R&D centers, the packaging facilities, that's going to have some big long-term benefits, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where the innovation happens. And that's especially true for fields like AI, which is
Mm.
developing so fast.
Right, right. And that actually leads us to another point, which is that the US is trying to, kind of reclaim its spot as the top dog in technology.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling that the U.S. needs to step up its game. China's been making a lot of progress in areas like semiconductors and AI,
Mm.
and they're not shy about their ambitions. They want to be the leader.
And so this TSMC investment is seen as a way for the US to, to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. And it's not just about TSMC either. You've got companies like Apple, Oracle, Samsung. They're all investing heavily in the U.S. So there's a real sense of momentum building.
Yeah, it's like a race, isn't it?
It really is. And the prize is, well, it's global leadership in the technologies that are going to shape the future.
So, by bringing TSMC to the US, it's not just about getting those factories. It's about keeping the innovation here, the jobs here.
Right. It's about making sure the U.S. stays in the driver's seat.
Now, we should also talk about, TSMC side of things. They have their own reasons for doing this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're not just doing this because the U.S. asked them to. They've got their own strategic goals.
And they've been pretty clear that they're not abandoning Taiwan, right?
Yeah, their CEO, C.C. Wei, has said that their most advanced stuff, the cutting-edge R&D, a lot of their production, that's all staying in Taiwan, and they'll be much bigger than what they're doing in the U.S.
So they're not turning their back on their home base.
Not at all. But they're also being smart. They're diversifying. If things get rocky in the Taiwan Strait, they've got a backup plan.
Right, right. They're hedging their bets.
Exactly. And that's good for their customers, too. They know they can rely on TSMC no matter what happens.
So it's a win-win, in a way.
In some ways, yeah. But now, let's flip the coin and look at the arguments against this investment, especially from Taiwan's perspective.
Yeah, because it's not all sunshine and roses, is it?
No, there's some serious concerns. And the biggest one is that this could weaken Taiwan's so-called silicon shield.
Now, can you explain that a bit? I mean, I know it's this idea that, Taiwan's dominance in chip making kind of protects it from China.
Right. It's like this. China wants to take control of Taiwan, but they know that if they do, the world will lose access to those chips. And that would be a disaster for everyone, including China. So the thinking is that Taiwan's control of this vital industry is a kind of deterrent. It makes China think twice about using force.
Because the economic fallout would be so huge.
Exactly. But if TSMC starts moving a lot of its production to the U.S., well, that deterrent weakens. Taiwan becomes less essential.
And that's a scary thought for Taiwan.
It is. In fact, Taiwan's former president, Ma Ying-jeou, has even called this a national security crisis. He's worried that the world won't be as committed to defending Taiwan if it's not the only source of these chips.
And, with what's happening in Ukraine, there's this feeling of, could Taiwan be next?
Yeah, that Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow sentiment is definitely out there. And it feeds into this fear that Taiwan could become a bargaining chip in the bigger game between the U.S. and China.
Which is a really, really unsettling thought.
It is. And then you've got this whole issue of political pressure. The way this deal was announced during the Trump administration, it really rubbed a lot of people in Taiwan the wrong way.
Yeah, I remember that. Trump was accusing Taiwan of stealing U.S. jobs, saying they needed to pay for protection.
And it all happened right when this TSMC deal was being made. So it felt like Taiwan was being strong-armed into this.
Like they had to pay a protection fee.
Exactly. And one analyst, Chantai Shi, said something really chilling. Once you agree to blackmail, there's no end to it.
So there's this fear that this is just the beginning, that the
Yeah.
U.S. will keep making demands.
That's the worry. And beyond the security and political stuff, there are real economic risks for Taiwan, too.
Right, because TSMC is a huge part of their economy.
It's massive. I mean, something like 15% of Taiwan's entire GDP comes from chip exports. So if TSMC starts shifting its focus away from Taiwan, that's a big problem.
And even though TSMC says they're keeping the advanced R&D in Taiwan, I guess there's some skepticism, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are worried that the U.S. will eventually pressure them to move more of the operations. Like, we gave you all these incentives, now you need to give us more.
Right, so it's like a slippery slope.
Exactly. And then you've got the whole issue of how this deal was done. The Trump administration was all about tariffs, threats. But the Biden administration is using subsidies, like the CIGPS Act.
Right, so it's carrots instead of sticks.
Exactly. And that seems like a better approach. But the fact that TSMC was basically forced into this by the threat of tariffs, Well, that sets a bad precedent.
It does, because what's to stop the U.S. from using that tactic again?
Right, and that just creates uncertainty, which is bad for business, bad for everyone.
And then, of course, we have to think about China's reaction to all of this.
Yeah, this is the big wild card. China sees Taiwan's chip industry as a problem, an obstacle to their plans for reunification.
And so, if Taiwan's silicon shield weakens, could that make China more aggressive?
It's definitely a possibility. And the Chinese media is already painting this as the U.S. bullying Taiwan.
Which could really stir up nationalist sentiment in China.
Absolutely. And that could make the situation in the region even more tense.
So we've got this really complicated picture, don't we?
We do. The U.S. wants security, wants to stay ahead in tech. Taiwan is worried about its own security, about its economy. And China is watching all of this very closely.
It's a high-stakes game, that's for sure. And no one really knows how it's going to play out.
Exactly. I mean, will this investment really make the U.S. more secure? Will it actually harm Taiwan in the long run? And what will China do? These are the big questions. And there are no easy answers.
That's for sure. So for everyone listening, here's something to think about. We've talked about the national security stuff, the economic concerns, the geopolitical risks, but what do you think is the single most important factor that will decide whether this TSMC investment is a success or a failure? And what about the unintended consequences? What could happen that we haven't even thought of?
I don't know. It's a lot to think about.
It is. But that's what the deep dive is all about. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Take care.